death sentences handed down to two British men captured in Ukraine. Our correspondent Ali Bunkel is in southern eastern Ukraine and joins us with some reaction to this on the phone. And Ali, just remind us these two British nationals and a Moroccan one as well, when they were captured and how this has all unfolded.
Yeah, they were both fighting for Ukrainian forces at the start of the conflict here back in February. They were both here for very different reasons, but essentially because they had relationships with Ukrainians and they had had a relationship with the country for some years. So they weren't directly part of the thousands of Foreign Legion fighters who came over after the start of the war, but they were fighting in the east. They were captured, I think, back in April, and they were sentenced and put on trial by the Russians. Now, I think the fear is that the Russians are making an example of them, partly because they are British, and the British have been heavily involved in arming the Ukrainians. The Russian government has repeatedly singled out Britain in particular for the help that it's been giving the Russians. But also, I think they are making a point against foreign fighters as well. But this was not the expected sentence, a death sentence handed down to these three men. The Foreign Office in the UK says they've been following it closely. They have repeatedly made statements saying that the men should be treated according to the Geneva Convention as prisoners of war. But they have been on trial in Donetsk, which is held by Russian forces at the moment. And they have reportedly, we're told, admitted to crimes of, and this is the charge against them, training people for terror acts. And the sentence they've got is a death sentence, which will, I think, come as a shock to anybody who's following it, shock to their families and shock to the British government, who have pleaded that they are treated as prisoners of war.
And Ali, you mentioned the Foreign Office there. I mean, I guess they weren't expecting, as you said, this to be the outcome. What's likely to be the response from here?
I think the Foreign Office and British government's in quite a difficult position. On the one hand, there was a slightly muddled advice coming from the British government as to whether people should come and help out the Ukrainians and fight in the conflict here. You might remember the Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss, so basically giving it her backing, and then that was criticised by the Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace. It was always going to be difficult when you start introducing foreign fighters into a conflict, because although the Ukrainians welcomed it, they had and I met people who were in charge of the administration of the Foreign Legion. You know, they had quite a substantial recruitment process by bringing people in, but the risk was you were always going to have the potential of Britons or other nationalities, Americans perhaps, being captured by Russian forces, and then what the Russians would do with that and how they would spin it, for example. And so I think the British government will have an obligation, because these two men are British nationals, they'll have an obligation to keep pressuring the Russian government to at least lessen the sentence from being a death sentence. But at the same time, they have to retain what has now become their line, that they do not support people coming to this country to fight.